right. Hello, Vikings. Welcome to Unit 1, Topic 1, talking about the democratic ideals, and also we're going to look at the Declaration of Independence today. So thank you for watching this video. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, or you can send me an email and I can clarify any understanding that we need. So I asked students our opener questions were, what do you know about the Declaration of Independence? Ask them some prior knowledge on popular sovereignty, natural rights, what's a republic, and what's a social contract, all topics that we'll look at today. Our learning objective was to explain how democratic ideals are reflected in the Declaration of Independence and also in the US Constitution. So we're going to go through those ideals, make sure we define them, and understand where exactly they are in those documents. So what is the Declaration of Independence? It's a formal statement written by Thomas Jefferson. It basically declares the freedom and the separation of the 13 colonies, the American colonies, from Great Britain, basically. So just a little review on history. Originally, the 13 colonies were controlled and they were under the authority of Great Britain, basically. But they didn't really like that, and they really felt that they were being abused. They weren't being represented in Congress. So Thomas Jefferson wrote a formal statement of separation. Basically, a bunch of the colonists got together and said, we need to declare independence. We need to basically become our own country. So Thomas Jefferson wrote a document to basically explain why we are justified in breaking off from Great Britain, but also explaining all the grievances, all the complaints about why we don't like Great Britain and why the king and parliament has abused us. So I did a little declaration on Twitter. Back in the day, to communicate ideas, basically they wrote them down in parchment and they mailed letters and stuff like that. So how would the declaration look like if we actually put it into a tweet? And so I put that in there. You can go ahead and take a look at that and just, laugh. That's just for giggles, basically. So great video called Too Late to Apologize. It's a parody video, and it's basically the founders singing to the king saying it's too late to apologize. This is over, and basically we're going to become our own country now. So I recommend you go back into lecture and watch that because it's enjoyable. Two other video clips that I recommend, both from the miniseries called John Adams that follows his life. And John Adams was very influential in the decision to declare independence. And he actually asked Thomas Jefferson to write the Declaration of Independence. So the first clip is basically him with Ben Franklin talking with Thomas Jefferson on what needs to be changed, just some edits. And it's kind of just interesting to see them kind of drafting and just kind of reviewing the document. So Thomas Jefferson wrote it, but he did get some thoughts and viewpoints on what else could maybe be included and maybe some word choices or changes. Also, then this other clip is basically just the reading out of the document that we'll translate later in an assignment. So what are the democratic ideals? Basically the idea of limited government, the idea of natural rights, popular sovereignty, republicanism, and then the social contract. So I'm going to go through each one of these and explain what it is, define it, and also explain how it's contained inside the Declaration of Independence. So I asked students to tell me, how is the US government limited? And they were able to provide responses in ways, things that our government can't do. Limited government just means you put defined limits on what the government can do, basically. In this country, we now have a constitution, and there's specific things in the constitution that says government is allowed to do this, they're not allowed to do this, basically. So there's definitely limits that we place on government with that constitution, basically. So different ways in which the US government is still limited is that the people have the power. The power comes from the people. We have protected civil liberties, like you have the right to own a weapon, you have the right to free speech, to assemble, to follow whatever religion you want or not follow whatever religion you want. The state can't establish a religion too. There's also prohibited powers. There's specific things in the Constitution that you'll see that basically the states and national government are both forbidden from doing. Also, there's a concept called federalism that we're going to explore later on in this unit, but that, just to introduce it, it's basically just the division of powers between the states and the federal government. Basically, the idea that the states will have some powers, the federal government will have some powers. They also share some powers as well, but we'll explore that more so next week when we look at federalism. So natural rights are basically rights that people supposedly have under natural law. There's a philosopher named John Locke who basically identified these as life, liberty, and property. John Locke was actually way before Thomas Jefferson's time, but Thomas Jefferson really looked up to Locke and he really liked his idea of natural rights and understanding the idea that government's job is to protect natural rights. So Thomas Jefferson definitely took the ideas of Locke when he was writing the Declaration of Independence, and he included basically what he called inalienable rights, and he identified those as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Popular sovereignty just, sovereignty just means power. So popular just means from the people. So popular sovereignty just means that the ultimate power or source of power is from the people, basically. Not from a king, not from a different governing body, but that the people ultimately have all the power, basically. And Thomas Jefferson talked about this. He basically said, we don't consent to your leadership. We don't consent to your authority. And in fact, government is created for us. So we're going to create our new government, and it's going to be sustained by popular sovereignty, by the consent or the agreement of the people, basically. So popular sovereignty just means that the people ultimately have all the power, and they express that power through electing their representatives, basically. So republicanism is just a support for a republican system of governments. And a republic is basically just a type of government where you elect your representatives. So that's the type of government that we have in this country. We elect our senators, we elect our House members, we also get to elect our president as well. And so their job is basically to represent us and represent our needs. And if we don't like what they're doing, it's our job as citizens to vote them out and find new people and vote for new people that will basically make sure that we're being well represented and that our needs and interests are being met. The Constitution does require that all states have a Republican form of government. But I just want to clarify, because we did hear the word Republican a lot when we talked about ideology in our Unit 4, but there is a difference between Republican with a small r and Republican with a big R. So Republican with a small r is the type of government that I just talked about, basically. It's where leaders and representatives are elected by the people, basically. So when you think republic or Republican with a small r, just think representative government. That's basically what it means. But there's also a political party. One of the major two parties in the United States is known as the Republican Party. That's with a big R, basically. So when you see it with a big R, that's a proper noun, and that's considered like a name, basically, which is proper. That's why we capitalize it. So sometimes when we say Republican, we're not referring to the type of government where we're represented. It's just referring to the political party specifically. The social contract is just basically this agreement among members of societies where we agree to cooperate for social benefits. For example, we'll sacrifice some individual liberty if it means guaranteed protection, or if it means protection from the group as a whole, basically. Different philosophers explored the idea of the social contract, but Thomas Jefferson definitely weaves the idea of the social contract in and out of the Declaration of Independence, basically, where he's saying, governments are created by people to protect them, and that governments basically, we're going to give up some freedoms, but we're going to get some protections in return, basically. For example, the social contract just basically says, if you don't kill me, I won't kill you. If you don't steal from me, I won't steal from you, basically. Now, are you fully protected in a society with a social contract? Not necessarily, because people can break the contract, and it happens all the time. But the idea is that we all agree to these rules, these basic rules for safety and protection. And so that basically gives us some safety in return, because we know, well, if I'm following these rules, and hopefully others are, and then if they aren't, it's the job of the governing authority basically to punish those people, to put them in jail, or just make them understand that it's not appropriate what they've done as far as breaking the social contract. And there's going to be some kind of consequence for that, basically. The Purge, basically, that movie, if you're familiar with that movie, is basically an idea that they get rid of the social contract for like a 12-hour period. So basically the protections that we get are basically lost during that 12-hour period during the Purge, but you also then have the total freedom to hurt people and steal from people, and all crime is essentially legal. So I really recommend that if you go back into the lecture that you check out this video. It's Trevor Noah, and he's talking about the social injustice protests over the summer, how they're all connected. But then also he talks about the broken social contract and how Black people in this country don't feel like the contract is being honored. And that's where their frustration and anger is coming from, and the reason that they're coming out to protest for change. So I do recommend that video. I think it's really interesting, and it's interesting how he weaves in the social contract into his understanding of society. So there were grievances in the Declaration of Independence. Grievances just means complaints, basically. Complaints about all the things that the King and the Parliament of Great Britain were doing to basically not, take away rights from the colonies. And basically they felt that it was just basically tyranny, that they didn't have any rights, they didn't have any protections. And a lot of these grievances were addressed in the Constitution, basically. They recognized we don't want to live under the same type of government that we were exposed under, the abusive relationship, with the King and all that kinds of stuff. So basically, a lot of the stuff that were problems in the Declaration that were listed, that the Declaration identified, basically were addressed in the Constitution. For example, one of the main complaints of the colonists was that there was taxation without representation. They were being taxed by Great Britain, but they weren't allowed to serve in the government. They weren't allowed to be a part of the lawmaking or the policy making in that government. The king had total power, and that was definitely a complaint. And so that's why we limit the power of the president. And our president is nowhere like what the king was back during those days. Don't nearly have a lot of the power. We separated the power between the three branches. You weren't allowed to speak out against the king. Now we have a First Amendment. We have freedom of speech. You can actually assemble. You can petition the government for your grievances. Housing soldiers in homes can't happen thanks to the Third Amendment. Also, you need to have a warrant to be able to search someone's home or evidence that they've committed a crime. So the Fourth Amendment protects that. Also, right to trial by jury is protected both in the Sixth and Seventh Amendments. So definitely a lot of the problems that were identified in the Declaration were addressed when they wrote the Constitution. Okay, so that's your vocab for topic 1.1. We need to know limited government, natural rights, popular sovereignty, republicanism, and social contract. So I also created a video that you can go back into lecture and find. This is just basically a document overview of the whole document, of how it could be used in an essay, and just the main ideas and main themes of the documents that you should have as your key takeaways, basically. So that's it for this lecture today. I really appreciate you guys for tuning in. Let me know if you have any questions or comments or anything that I can do to improve these videos. I really do appreciate it, and I hope that these are just helpful to you. I'm pretty sure that you can subscribe here or like something here or watch the next video or something like that. I forget how YouTube sets that all up, but look around me and see if you can click on those fun things right there. All right, Vikings, I really appreciate you. Thanks, and have a great day.